Hello guys, welcome to Dr. Night Stare. I know you guys come here to relax and take a nap. So before we go, please hit like and subscribe. By the way, also tell me what time and where you guys listening from. Alright then. Eleanor had dedicated over 10 years to the quiet hum of the local art gallery, her role as a night security guard a solitary comfort. She preferred the hushed hours after dusk, when the world outside felt like a distant, ethereal concept she didn't have to engage with. Her shifts were a predictable rhythm of patrols through cold, silent rooms, past canvases and sculptures that offered no complaints. 2 weeks prior, her supervisor, Mr. Henderson, had informed her of a new acquisition for the backroom archives. It wasn't another painting or bust, it was a towering grandfather clock, carved from a wood so dark and oily it seemed to swallow the beam of her flashlight. "Whatever you do, don't wind it," Mr. Henderson had cautioned. The donor insisted its mechanism is extremely fragile. Eleanor initially paid the clock no mind, but on the fourth night, an unsettling sound emanated from the archives. It wasn't the rhythmic tick of a timepiece, but a slow, heavy, wet thump, like a giant heartbeat. She pushed the door open to find Marcus, her morning shift counterpart, standing rigid before the clock. His gaze was fixed on the pendulum, and he didn't acknowledge her entry. "Do you hear it, Eleanor?" Marcus whispered, his voice dry. "It's not keeping time, it's counting down." "Counting down to what?" Eleanor asked, a chill tracing her spine as she maintained her distance. Marcus finally turned. His face was gaunt, the skin stretched taut over hollowed cheeks as if the very substance beneath had withered away. "To the moment we swap. He's tired of the wood. He wants the bone." The following day, Marcus never arrived for his shift. Mr. Henderson relayed that he had vanished, his car discovered running in the gallery parking lot. Eleanor was asked to cover a double. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the art gallery fell into an unnatural silence. While patrolling the Impressionist wing, Eleanor noticed a disturbing alteration. The vibrant landscapes and portraits weren't facing the center of the room as usual. Every single one was now angled towards the staircase leading down to the archives. A sudden, sharp ache seized Eleanor's chest. "Tick!" she gasped, clutching her heart. It wasn't a muscle spasm. It felt like a cold, internal gear grinding into place. She stumbled into the employee lounge, splashing water on her face. In the mirror, just beneath her collarbone, a small, brass keyhole had appeared. Panic clawed at her. She raced to the main entrance, but the grand oak doors wouldn't budge. She pulled and kicked with all her might, but they felt as unyielding as solid rock. Through the heavy glass, she desperately scanned the deserted street, hoping for a passing car or a late pedestrian, but the sidewalks were empty. The streetlights outside began to flicker in a chilling, rhythmic pattern. Tick, 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 tick. The entire building was transforming. The elegant plaster walls were darkening, gaining the fibrous texture of oily wood. The large windows were slowly becoming opaque, like smoked glass. Eleanor retreated to the security booth, hoping to find a working phone, but the familiar desk and monitors were gone. In their place stood the clock, but it was far taller now, reaching almost to the ceiling. And the pendulum wasn't metal anymore. It was a human arm, pale and lifeless, swinging back and forth, its fingers brushing the floor with each agonizing second. She lifted her gaze to the clock's face. There were no numbers, only a series of words: diner, lake, bookshop, childhood home. The hand spun wildly, stopping briefly at each location. With every pause, Eleanor felt a piece of herself being forcibly torn away. She forgot the comforting aroma of her favorite diner coffee. She forgot the sound of her sister's infectious laugh. She forgot the winding paths of her childhood home. "Please," she sobbed, collapsing to her knees. The clock door creaked open. Inside, where intricate gears should have been, she saw Marcus. He was grotesquely woven into the machinery, his veins serving as wires, his ribs forming the frame. His eyes, devoid of warmth, fixed on her with an expression of pure, chilling envy. "Your turn, Eleanor," he rasped, the sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. The keyhole beneath her collarbone began to twist on its own. She felt her skin hardening, her joints locking into an unyielding embrace. She was no longer a woman. She was a vessel for seconds. With her remaining strength, Eleanor scrawled this message on a scrap of paper she'd found in the janitor's closet, praying the morning cleaner would discover it. But as she looked at her hands, they were already morphing into dark, polished wood. Her heart no longer beat, it only clicked. She heard the front door creaking open. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Mr. Henderson, surely, coming to check on her. Eleanor hoped he liked his new watch, because she was about to become his entire world. Leo remembered the previous New Year's vividly. He'd been alone, wandering out the back of a dimly lit nightclub, consumed by a quiet despair. Then, standing in a forgotten alleyway, a desperate, heart-wrenching wish had burst from him for Isabel to fall in love with him. It was a pure, unadulterated longing, born of loneliness. And it had worked. Their first date followed the next week. By February, Isabel had moved into his apartment, breaking her lease without a moment's hesitation. Leo had never known such delirious joy. Now, a year later, he was back in the same smoky establishment, the pulsating beat of the music, a discordant soundtrack to the cold dread that had settled in his heart. Isabel's beautiful face, illuminated by the flashing disco lights, turned to him. She gripped his arm, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Leo, it's almost midnight." He hesitated, and her smile faltered. "You promised me," she yelled over the deafening bass. They started walking towards the service exit at the back, his heart flopping about in his chest with an acute misery. Foolishly, he had told her about the wish just a few months ago. Isabel hadn't denied or withdrawn her love then. It was too strong, too undeniable. But she had become insistent, a new, relentless determination in her gaze. She made Leo promise to take her to that exact spot this New Year. She wanted a wish too. Leo had tried to cajole her into telling him what her wish was, but she wouldn't. And she was so sweet and loving in her refusal that he eventually gave up, melting into the bliss of being loved by her. "Isabel, please," begged Leo as the thumping noise of the nightclub began to fade behind them. "Sweetheart, tell me." Isabel stopped at the old metal door, drawing him close. She kissed him deeply, a kiss that felt like a drowning man gasping for air, a desperate, fleeting hope. Then she opened the door and stepped out into the chilly night. Outside, a scattered crowd began the rhythmic chant of the countdown. "Here," she called, her voice clear in the sudden quiet. Leo shook his head miserably. How could he possibly give her up? But maybe her wish had nothing to do with him. Maybe the force of their love would keep them together, prevent her from wishing anything destructive. Maybe she simply wanted to wish for a healthy life or success in her career, or some mundane desire. "To the left a bit," he muttered, and against his will, he positioned her on the exact spot where New Year wishes came true. 7, 6, 5, Isabel declared loudly. "I wish to fall out of love with Leo, the man standing here beside me." Cheers erupted from the crowd, and fireworks burst across the night sky, painting it in brilliant hues. Leo covered his face with his hands, a choked sob escaping his lips. And so he didn't see the flash of steel until it was too late, Isabel burying the sharp point of the knife deep into his heart with a guttural grunt of pure hatred. The last words he heard were her whispering so viciously he could barely recognize her voice. "You selfish bastard. Die, you motherfucker. Burn in hell." And then he slumped down on the cold street, his lifeblood gushing out, the click-clack of her heels fading away into the celebratory chaos of the new year. Got a live one tonight. Will could hear the frantic whines even through the sturdy workshop door. "Good," he replied. "You know I like a little fight in 'em. How long's this one been here, Leo?" "About a week. Not in the best shape, but you'll have to make do." "How much? For my best customer?" Leo paused to consider his offer. "Let's say an even 1,000. Will retrieved an envelope from his coat pocket and removed a wad of bills. He counted out 10 of them, folded over the stack, and offered it to Leo. Have a good time, Leo said, holding out a deposit box for Will to leave his phone. No recording was the only rule. Leo handed Will a key and slipped on a pair of headphones. Like clockwork, Will came on the first Tuesday of each month. That's when Will told his wife Sarah and daughter Emily that he and the other Rotary Club members met for planning meetings. 30 minutes or so passed, and the door opened. A slightly disheveled Will exited the room. "Good one this month," he said. Leo nodded and handed over the deposit box. Will grabbed his phone and saw a missed call from Sarah. "I'll be in touch," he told Leo, and went outside to his sedan. Once in the quiet of the vehicle, Will phoned back his wife. "Hey babe, leaving now. Be there in 20. "'Kay, drive safe," Sarah replied. Will returned home and walked into the kitchen to find Sarah at the stove making dinner. "Hope you're hungry tonight," she said with a laugh. "I never know how much lasagna to make." "Fine by me. You know leftover lasagna is my favorite." Will grabbed 3 plates from a cabinet and brought them to the table. Dinner," he called. Emily descended from upstairs with 8 loud thumps. "Hi, Dad. How was the Rotary thing?" "Meh, business as usual," Will replied as they all sat down at the table. "Did you discuss a new community sign?" asked Sarah. "The one out there now is barely visible from the street." "Yep." Will spooned some salad onto his plate. "Just need to appropriate the funds and find a good company to make it. We don't want it falling and hurting anyone." "Not a bad idea for an insurance scam," Emily said. "I'd be able to buy a car in no time." Sarah shook her head and smiled. "Or you could be like a normal person and get a job." "I'm trying, Mom. How's the search going?" asked Will. "I'm trying, Mom." "How's the search go?" asked Will. "Tried a few clothing stores at the town square. Just waiting to hear back." "Well, keep at it. You'll find something soon," Sarah said. "I know how badly you want the car." "Seriously, why can't we be rich? You just had to become a financial advisor, huh, Dad?" "I wanted to be a rock star," said Will. "But there was one tiny problem." "Yeah," Emily said. "You sound like a dying cat when you sing." "Bingo," Sarah chimed in. The 3 had a chuckle and the conversation drifted off. Dinner continued as normal, as did the coming days, and soon the weeks faded into the uniformity of suburbia. A month went by when one night they found themselves in the living room watching TV. "Oh, I've got good news," said Emily. "You're moving out?" Sarah smiled wryly. "You wish. But anyways, I have a job interview at the town square tomorrow. Can I take your sedan, Dad?" Will shook his head. "Sorry, got the Rotary meeting." That's right. First Tuesday," Emily groaned. "Guess I'm getting the minivan." "What time do you need it?" asked Sarah. 4:30. Sarah nodded in confirmation. "Well," Will said, standing up from the couch. "With that, I think I'll hit the hay. I have an early morning client meeting. Hopefully I'll come home to an employed daughter." He kissed the top of both girls' heads. "Good night, love you." The next workday passed uneventfully, and Will made his monthly trek to Leo's. He parked down the street and fired off a text to Emily. "Hope the interview went well. Can't wait to hear about it later." Will exited the sedan and made his way to Leo's workshop door, signaling his presence with a special knock. Leo answered with an enthusiastic grin. "It's your lucky day. Got a fresh one for you," he said, ushering Will inside. "How much?" asked Will, reaching for the envelope of money in his coat pocket. $3,000. Will raised an eyebrow. "Buddy, this one's special. Arrived about 2 hours ago. You get first crack." Will pursed his lips and took a deep breath. "Okay, but for that price, I've got a request." "Name it. Turn the lights off. I want a little more of a challenge this time." Leo shrugged. "Sure, if you want." Will handed over a wad of bills, and Leo extended the deposit box. Will silenced his phone and deposited it into the container, and in return, Leo handed over a key. "Lights off," Leo said, flipping a switch to the left of the doorway. Will slipped into the room. Almost immediately, the thuds and grunts of a struggle emanated from behind the door. Leo put on his headphones and sat down to wait. 30 minutes went by, then an hour. Will didn't usually take this long. 75 minutes passed. 90. Leo's heartbeat began to quicken. Any deviation from the norm made him nervous. Right when Leo had worked up the courage to investigate, Will emerged from the room, tidying himself. "Worth every penny. Will said, zipping his fly. He reached into the deposit box for his phone. Keep the girls coming like that, and I'll make you a very rich man. Leo nodded his acknowledgement, and Will left. Once outside, Will glanced at his phone to find 24 missed calls from Sarah. He hurried to the sedan and dialed back. The phone barely had a chance to ring before a panicked Sarah answered. Will, where the fuck are you? The store called looking for Emily. She didn't make it to her interview, and I can't get a hold of her either. Will's heart leapt into his throat. Emily wouldn't have missed the interview on purpose. Everything will be fine, he replied. I'll be right there. He hung up and went to slam on the gas, but a stomach-wrenching thought stopped him cold. He flung open the glove compartment, grabbed his pistol, and dashed back down the street. Startled by the sudden banging at his door, Leo looked out the small grate to see Will furiously pounding. He cracked open the door, and Will muscled his way inside, holding the gun to Leo's head. Whoa, what the fuck? Leo raised his arms. Where'd you get the one today? Asked Will. You know I can't give you details. Will retightened his grip on the gun. Answer the question, or I'll blow your fucking head off. Oak. She was picked up over by the town square. What the hell is? A shot pierced the air, and Leo slumped backward onto the ground. Will's heart thundered in his chest as he stepped over the body and approached the heavy metal door. He grasped the cold handle, pausing to drop his head in prayer before easing it open and looking inside. Curled up in the far corner was Emily, clothes shredded and hair tangled. She recoiled at first, but upon seeing it was Will, scrambled to embrace her father. A horrified Will stood frozen as his daughter hugged him with all her might. In the dim light, he could see cuts and scrapes covering her body. He wriggled from her embrace, doubled over and retched. Dad? Will looked up at Emily and began to weep. Oh, fuck, he whimpered, standing up and putting his hands on his head. He paced back and forth in distress. I'm sorry, he blubbered, standing up and hugging Emily. So sorry. He kissed the top of her head and pressed her face further into his body, shielding her from seeing him raise the gun. It's gonna be okay, he said, voice trembling. I love you, Em. He closed his eyes and pulled the trigger, cringing at the sound of the shot. Emily went limp in his arms. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he tenderly lowered her to the ground, eyes still clamped shut to avoid the horror. His mind raced as he staggered back to his sedan. He considered running, but Sarah would be shattered when the truth came to light. Surely she would die of a broken heart. He couldn't do that to her. If only he could take back what he had done. Through the tears, Will clasped his hands together and looked skyward, asking for guidance. More than anything, he wanted his family to be together again. They would never share another meal or go camping at their favorite spot by the lake. No birthday or anniversary could ever be the same. Guidance must have answered Will's prayers, for a solution came to him. There still was a way for his family to be together again. He sped home to Sarah and found his wife at the table, face buried in her arms, sobbing. She raised her head, and their tear-stained eyes met for a split second before Sarah glanced down to his crimson-stained clothes. Will, is that? Without a word, he whipped the gun from behind his back and discharged a single slug into her forehead. Sarah toppled off the chair and onto the floor, dead from the shot. Will rushed to her side and laid down on his back next to her, taking her lifeless hand in his. Lord Jesus, he said, forgive me for my sins. By dying, you unlock the gates of life for those who believe in you. Do not let me be parted from you, but by your glorious power, let me and my family reunite in the eternal rest of God, where you live and reign for all eternity. Amen. And with that final prayer, Will inserted the gun into his mouth and squeezed the trigger. Ethan, a 20-year-old, valued the steady rhythm of his days. Mornings in his small apartment were for coffee and tidying, followed by his university classes. Evenings meant cooking, a quick call with friends, and then, at precisely 8:03 p.m., the comforting ritual of settling onto his sofa to watch television. It was his chosen way to unwind after a demanding day. Yet, last Monday, the familiar comfort of the screen felt subtly wrong. About half an hour into a show, an odd compulsion began to pull him. His body moved closer to the display, not by conscious decision, but as if an invisible thread guided him, a strange blend of sleepwalking and acute awareness. Suddenly, a jolt, as sharp as a snap, broke the spell. He crashed back against the cushions, feeling an oppressive presence lift, as though something had been expelled from within him. For the remainder of the night, he lay awake, his gaze darting nervously between his apartment door and the now dark television, an unsettling dread clinging to him. Tuesday afternoon, he called his mother, Sarah, recounting the disturbing incident. Her voice, usually so steady, turned sharp with panic. "Ethan, leave your apartment immediately. Go to the nearest inn, and whatever you do, do not turn on a television." Her fear was contagious. By 8 p.m., he was checked into a quiet inn, ordering dinner delivery. He fell asleep around 3 p.m., intending to wake early and meet Sarah at his apartment. But at 2:40 a.m., he awoke abruptly, his face pressed against the inn-room's television screen, which glowed with a hissing static. He recoiled violently, his head slamming into the ceiling fan with a sickening crack, and the world went black. He opened his eyes to the sterile brightness of a hospital room. Sarah was slumped in a chair to his right, a heart monitor beeping beside his left. When he attempted to sit up, a searing pain shot through his skull, forcing him back against the pillow. Sarah rushed to his side, comforting him. The nurse later confirmed a concussion, assuring him he was all right, but requiring another night of observation. Sarah promised to explain everything later, urging him to rest. He drifted off once more, only to awaken again around 2 a.m. In the corner of the room, a small, wall-mounted television flickered to life, showing nothing but static. An unseen force began to lift him from the bed. He tried to scream, but his mouth felt sealed, his voice stolen. The force pulled him closer, and as his face neared the screen, a chilling resignation washed over him. He closed his eyes. His consciousness plunged into the television. He found himself in a black, viscous hallway. Before him stood a grotesque creature with disproportionate limbs and a wide, unsettling white smile. It tilted its head, then lunged forward. Ethan struggled against the invisible pull, but it held him fast, pushing him ever closer. Just as the creature's distorted face filled his vision, strong hands gripped his ankles, yanking him backward. He tumbled to the hospital floor with a gasp. He slowly turned, fear battling with relief, to see his mother, Sarah. The television immediately went dark. Ignoring the throbbing agony in his head, he scrambled up and embraced her fiercely. "What was that?" he managed, his voice hoarse. Sarah gently guided him to sit on the bed, her face etched with profound sorrow. A tear escaped her eye as she began to speak. Many years ago, when she and his father were first together, they had fallen on hard times, homeless, starving, and utterly without hope. At their lowest point, a man in a tailored suit had approached them with a proposition. He would lift them from destitution, providing abundant food and money, but in return, they had to surrender the soul of their firstborn when he reached his 20th year. Desperate, they had reluctantly agreed. Now, the man or thing had returned to fulfill the bargain. As Sarah finished, a crushing despair settled upon Ethan. His gaze, fixed on his mother's tear-streaked face, suddenly caught a faint, pulsing light. He turned, his eyes drawn inexorably to the television. Clara and her sister Sarah had shared a cozy townhouse on Elm Street for the better part of a year. Their arrangement was surprisingly smooth, marked only by the occasional playful dispute over who had eaten the last yogurt or whose turn it was to wash up. The calm routine shattered one Tuesday evening when Sarah returned home from her university classes. Clara was instantly struck by her sister's appearance. Sarah was ashen, her skin slick with a cold sweat, and she moved with a dragging, leaden gait. Clara initially attributed it to a particularly grueling day or a lack of sleep, ushering Sarah to bed with a promise of restorative soup. Yet, the sight of Sarah's face, utterly devoid of color, sent a shiver of genuine alarm through Clara. She had never seen anyone look so utterly drained of life. When Clara brought the steaming bowl of soup to Sarah's room, her sister was already in a deep, unresponsive sleep. Clara placed the soup on the bedside table, expecting Sarah to rouse within the hour, as was her usual habit. But the evening stretched on, then the night, until the clock hands crept past 2 a.m. Sarah remained profoundly asleep. A knot of dread tightened in Clara's stomach. This was beyond a simple nap. She resolved to call for a visiting doctor first thing in the morning. The physician arrived promptly, but after a tense 20 minutes of examination, his expression was grim. He advised Clara to call an ambulance immediately, stating that Sarah's condition was critical and far beyond what he could address. For the next 3 days at St. Jude's Medical Center, Clara was a constant presence by Sarah's bedside, sleeping, eating, and simply existing in the sterile hospital room. Sarah barely spoke or ate, her only complaint a persistent ache in her left forearm, which she often brushed as if trying to dislodge an invisible insect. A week blurred by, and Sarah's condition deteriorated alarmingly. Her doctors, baffled by the unknown illness, warned Clara that her sister was mere days from life support and a likely coma. Sarah's skin was now almost translucent, bone-white like paper, her body shockingly emaciated and cold to the touch. Clara sat holding her sister's frigid hand, watching Sarah gasp for each labored breath, her heart shattering with every painful sight. Desperate, Clara called their older brother Mark, urging him to come. He arrived the next day with his young daughter Lily, who adored her Aunt Sarah. Lily and Sarah shared a special bond, filled with sleepovers and movie nights when Sarah babysat. Mark entered the hospital room, his face etched with sorrow as he took in Sarah's fragile state. He and Clara embraced, and she recounted the baffling, terrifying ordeal, emphasizing how countless tests had yielded no answers. As Clara and Mark sat on either side of Sarah's bed, holding her hands and staring at her ghostly face, Mark's phone rang, pulling him from the room for a moment. Just then, a small voice echoed from the hallway. Lily, holding her mother's hand, peered around the doorframe. "What's that?" she asked, her gaze fixed on her aunt. "That's Aunt Sarah, sweetie," Clara replied gently. "She's very sick." But Lily wasn't looking at Sarah. Her small finger shot towards the window, her face contorted in an expression of pure, indignant anger. "Let go of her," she demanded, her voice surprisingly fierce. Clara looked, utterly bewildered, in the direction Lily was pointing. "Let my aunt go. Now. Now," Lily repeated, her voice rising. "Leave, let her go, and don't come back." Clara knelt, trying to soothe her. "Sweetie, who are you talking to?" But Lily ignored her, walking purposefully to Sarah's bedside. She reached out, grasping Sarah's hand, and stared intently at a spot in the empty air near the window. "Don't come back," she whispered, her head resting on Sarah's arm. Clara, her back pressed against the wall, a sudden, chilling understanding dawning on her, watched the extraordinary scene unfold. Mark walked back in moments later, missing the entire pivotal interaction, as always. In the days that followed, an inexplicable miracle occurred. Sarah began to improve. She awoke, started to eat, and slowly, painstakingly, her skin regained a faint blush of color. Her appetite and strength gradually returned, bringing an overwhelming wave of relief to Clara and their family. The doctors at St. Jude's remained utterly bewildered, unable to offer any medical explanation for the dramatic turnaround. Clara, however, had begun to suspect that whatever afflicted Sarah was beyond the realm of conventional medicine. Later, when Sarah was strong enough, she recounted a disturbing dream she'd had during her long slumber. A black, voided, skinny man, who seemed to bend the light around him, had held her left forearm, steadily draining the life from her. He had followed her everywhere, never leaving her side. The dream offered a chilling explanation for her persistent forearm pain. Lily, Clara reflected, was a devout child who loved her Bible stories, prayed with earnest conviction, and lived by a strong moral compass. Clara now sincerely believed that Lily had seen something, an unseen malevolent entity, and through her innocent but powerful rebuke, had cast it away from her aunt. The entire experience had profoundly shaken Clara, leaving her with a lingering sense of awe and a newfound awareness of unseen forces. She resolved to keep her extraordinary niece close at hand. Arthur had always lived by the clock. 5:30 a.m., the alarm blared, followed by the ritual of brewing black coffee potent enough to strip paint. Then, off to whatever dead-end job sustained him. For the past 6 months, that meant Abyssal Harvest Corp., a sprawling warehouse on the fringes of Blackwood Cove, Oregon, where the air eternally carried the scent of brine and slow decay. His task? Quality control tester for shrimp. Yes, he understood the incredulity. His job was to eat shrimp. Or, at least, what he believed were shrimp. The opportunity had seemed innocuous enough. An online advertisement promised, "No experience necessary. Competitive pay. Must have a strong stomach and no seafood allergies." Freshly laid off from a cannery, a casualty of automation, and with savings rapidly receding like the tide, Arthur figured, why not? The interview was a formality, a cursory meeting with a perpetually bored HR representative named Marlene, who simply slid a form and pen across the polished desk. "Sign here and you're in," she droned, her eyes glazed with routine. The warehouse itself was a colossal humming beast, a labyrinth of conveyor belts and frost-rimmed freezers. Arthur's station, the tasting lab, was a sterile white box, tucked away from the main floor's industrial roar. Fluorescent tubes hummed like trapped insects above a stark metal table and stool. A one-way mirror dominated one wall, and Arthur often felt the prickle of unseen eyes watching from its dark depths. Each day, he'd clock in, don a hairnet and gloves, and wait for the samples. The process was simple. A slot in the wall would open, and a tray would slide out, bearing 10 to 15 shrimp, peeled and deveined, sometimes raw, sometimes seasoned. Arthur would consume them one by one, diligently noting texture, flavor, and freshness on a digital tablet. Too salty? Mark it down. Rubbery? Flag it. An off-putting aftertaste? Report it. Then, the tray would retract, and another would appear. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It was monotonous, but at 25, an hour plus benefits, it was a king's ransom in Blackwood Cove. Initially, Arthur relished the work. Shrimp had always been a quiet indulgence. Cocktail shrimp at gatherings, shrimp scampi during long-forgotten date nights. The samples were consistently premium, plump, succulent, delivering that unmistakable briny snap of fresh catch. He'd chew slowly, savoring the burst of ocean flavor, the subtle sweetness beneath the salt. His notes were glowing, excellent firmness, perfect balance of umami, no fishy undertone. He even began dreaming of shrimp endless platters shimmering in a sea of crimson sauce. But around the 3rd week, things grew, peculiar. The textures shifted first. One batch felt off, too fibrous, almost stringy, as if tougher threads were woven within the flesh. He noted it, slightly chewy, possible overprocessing. The next day, a batch arrived, and one day a batch arrived, and a few seemed to possess a faint, lingering motility. Arthur blinked, attributing it to an optical trick, but no tiny, involuntary spasms rippled beneath the translucent shells, as if the creatures weren't quite deceased. He typed, fingers hesitating, "Residual nerve activity?" From his cannery days, he'd seen fish twitch post-mortem, but shrimp were meant to be inert. He mentioned it to Marlene during their weekly check-in. Her voice, tinny through the intercom, dismissed it with a laugh. "Oh, that's just our new sourcing. Deep-sea varieties, fresher than fresh, keeps the flavor locked in." Arthur nodded, though a seed of doubt had been planted. Deep-sea shrimp? Blackwood Cove's waters were shallow, stormy, not the abyssal depths Marlene implied. As weeks bled into months, the anomalies compounded. Some shrimp bore an iridescent sheen, like oil on water, shifting from blue to green to purple under the lab lights. Others tasted metallic, a coppery tang that clung to his tongue for hours. Headaches became a constant companion after shifts, pounding migraines that blurred his vision. At home, he'd collapse onto his couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling an unsettling sensation, as if something was subtly shifting beneath his own skin. One night, after sampling a particularly bizarre bat shrimp that popped like caviar when bitten, releasing a viscous, warm fluid, he dreamed vividly. He found himself submerged, not in water, but in an abyssal dreamscape. A vast, dark ocean trench unfolded around him, lit only by the ghostly dance of bioluminescent forms. These weren't fish. They were elongated, segmented things with too many glowing eyes clustered in rows, pulsing with an alien light. They beckoned. When Arthur instinctively reached out, one lashed onto his hand, its mouth parts unfurling with the horrifying grace of a blooming predator. He awoke gasping, his palm itching where nothing was present. The next shift, the trays came relentlessly, without pause. He barely finished logging one batch before another slid out. The shrimp were larger now, almost prawn-sized, with veins that pulsed faintly under their translucent flesh. He bit into one, and it squirted. Warm, not cold as it should have been. The flavor was richer, almost creamy, with an undercurrent of something earthy, like soil after rain, mingled with a faint taste of blood. He flagged it. Unusual temperature sample warm upon arrival. Flavor profile altered. Silence. No reply from the intercom. Usually, Marlene or someone would offer an immediate flimsy excuse. Just silence. His body had begun its insidious transformation. He noticed it in the mirror one morning. His skin grew paler, almost translucent, revealing a network of prominent blue veins, particularly stark around his neck and wrists. A relentless itch plagued him, driving him to scratch until skin broke. The headaches that had once merely throbbed now carried whispers, faint as static, bubbling up from an unknown source. At work, the one-way mirror sometimes fogged, as if a breath had been exhaled on the other side. He'd catch glimpses of movement in the reflection, shadows shifting when his gaze wasn't directly upon it. And the shrimp. God, the shrimp. Their appearance had changed. Not just texture or taste, but shape. Some had extra ridges along their tails, tiny protrusions like nascent limbs. Others bore what looked undeniably like eye spots, dark dots that seemed to track his movements as he lifted them to his mouth. He tried to quit once. After a shift, tablet clutched in shaking hands, he sought out Marlene's office. "This isn't right," he stammered. "The samples. They're not normal shrimp." She offered that same glazed smile. "Nonsense, Arthur. You're our best tester. Top scores every week. Here's a bonus." She slid an envelope across the desk, 500 cash. He took it. Bills, after all, demanded payment. That night, the itching intensified to a fever pitch. In the shower, he scratched his forearm raw, and something moved beneath the skin. A ripple, like a worm burrowing. He stared, water cascading over him, convinced it was a hallucination. But no, it happened again. A small bulge traveling up his arm, then vanishing. The dreams grew more frequent. Always the Tretch, the glowing creatures. But now, they spoke. Not with voices, but with impressions. Hunger, ancient patience, a promise of belonging. He'd wake with the taste of salt on his lips, though he lived miles from the shore. The trays never stopped. He consumed hundreds a day, his stomach distending painfully, yet he never felt full. The shrimp were unmistakably alive now. They would curl when touched, their antennae, actual antennae, twitching. Some tried to escape the tray, scuttling toward the edge. He'd pin them with a fork, force them down. The taste was an exquisite agony, sweet decay, an electric vitality surging through him. His notes grew erratic. Sample exhibits motility. Recommend halt. Flavor induces euphoria. Potential contaminant. Eyes present. Multiple. Still, silence from the intercom. He began sneaking samples home, wrapped in napkins, hidden in his lunch bag. Under his kitchen light, magnified with a cheap loupe he'd bought online, the truth stared back. They weren't shrimp. Segmented bodies, jointed legs folded tight, mandibles tucked beneath. Larval forms, perhaps, of something vastly larger. Deep-sea horrors, harvested from trenches no submersible should ever breach. He spent nights searching online forums devoted to cryptic marine life, leaked documents from obscure oceanographic expeditions, whispers of benthic anomalies caught in trawls off the continental shelf, things that mimicked commercial species to infiltrate supply chains, parasites that rewrote hosts from within. The itching spread everywhere, his back, his scalp, between his toes. In the mirror, his eyes had changed, pupils slightly elongated, irises flecked with that same strange iridescence. One shift, the slot opened, but no tray emerged. Instead, a voice, at last, from the intercom. Not Marlene's. Deeper, resonant, like pressure waves in the crushing depths. You've adapted well. Integration phase complete. The lights in the lab dimmed, the one-way mirror cleared, revealing not an observation room, but darkness. An abyss lit by faint bioluminescence. Shapes moved beyond, massive, segmented, chillingly familiar. Arthur looked down at his hands. Without pain, the skin split, peeling back like a discarded shell. Beneath, something pale and jointed flexed, testing the air. Were they legs? Feelers? He couldn't quite tell. The tray arrived then, empty, an invitation. He understood. His job hadn't been to test shrimp. It was to become the vessel, to carry them inland, to spread the brood. The whispers clarified. We are the tide that returns. You are the bridge. Arthur stepped toward the slot. It widened, accommodating. The air grew cold, briny. As he crossed the threshold into the wet dark beyond the wall, he felt the last vestiges of the old Arthur slough away. Only hunger remained, the eternal, patient hunger. Back in the tasting lab, a new stool waited, a new tablet. Soon, another applicant would sign the form. Arthur was now the offering, awaiting the next unsuspecting soul. I always detested the sprawling Victorian mansion my parents acquired when I was 15. It loomed on the edge of town, nestled awkwardly between a bustling marketplace and a quiet ancient bookstore. The estate agent had cryptically mentioned that the previous occupant departed abruptly, leaving most of his belongings and a peculiar metallic tang that permeated the hallways. My father, Arthur, assigned me the attic study, but I spent countless hours in the municipal gardens or holed up at the university library, desperate to escape its oppressive atmosphere. There was a palpable weight to the air within its walls, as if the entire structure was holding its breath. One evening, while my mother, Alara, was preparing dinner in the kitchen, and my younger brother, Leo, was engrossed with his toy soldiers in the drawing room, I stumbled upon a small, unassuming wooden door hidden behind a stack of forgotten trunks in the mansion's deepest cellar. It lacked any sort of handle, featuring only a small, circular indentation where a lock might once have been. I broached the subject with my father, but he merely shrugged, stating that the surveyor's reports had made no mention of any additional rooms. My inherent curiosity, however, wouldn't let it rest. Once the household was steeped in slumber, I retrieved a torch and a sturdy pry bar from the tool shed and ventured downstairs. The cellar air bit with an icy chill. I inserted the pry bar into the circular hole and felt the soft click resonate through the wood. The door didn't swing outward. Instead, it glided almost silently sideways into the thick stone wall. Beyond it, a flight of rough-hewn stone steps spiraled downwards into a space that, architecturally speaking, shouldn't have existed. According to the town's blueprints, this area should have been directly beneath the foundations of the ancient bookstore next door. I descended into a small, windowless, subterranean chamber. It was painted entirely in a flat, unsettling shade of matte gray. There was no furniture, save for a single worn wooden chair positioned to face the far wall. On that wall, someone had meticulously pinned dozens upon dozens of photographs. I leaned closer, my heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The faces in the pictures weren't those of strangers. They were photos of us. There was my sister Daisy walking to the bus stop, my mother Alara at the grocery store, our neighbor Mrs. Finch hanging laundry on her veranda, and there were hundreds of me. Clara sipping coffee at the quaint coffee shop, poring over books in the university library, even deeply asleep in my own attic study. The truly terrifying aspect wasn't merely the invasion of privacy. It was the perspective. In every single photograph depicting me in my bedroom, the camera angle was from the ceiling, looking straight down. Then, I heard the door behind me slide shut with a soft, unsettling thud. I whirled around frantically, but there was no handle on this side. I was trapped within the gray room. I began to scream for my father, my fists hammering against the wooden barrier. but the thick gray walls seemed to absorb every ounce of sound. The matte paint itself felt unnervingly soft, almost like pliable skin. I slumped onto the chair, the sole object in the room, and noticed a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath the seat. I opened it. It was a diary, penned by the mansion's previous tenant. "This house is a perfect mirror," the first page read in shaky script. "It doesn't merely contain people, it meticulously duplicates them. But the copies are invariably flawed. They lack the intrinsic warmth. They lack the very soul. I've been confined down here for 3 months now. I can distinctly hear the other, Meme upstairs, conversing with my wife. She hasn't yet perceived the subtle difference. He sounds identical to me, yet he never blinks." I dropped the journal, the revelation chilling me to the bone. Above me, I heard heavy, rhythmic footsteps. They were undoubtedly coming from my attic study. Then, a voice. It was my voice. "Alara? Arthur?" "I'm heading out for a walk to the gardens," the voice called out, perfectly clear. I heard my mother's cheerful response from the kitchen. "All right, dear, be back by dinner." I shrieked until my throat was raw and burning, but the me upstairs continued its charade. I heard the front door of the mansion slam shut. A heavy silence descended. I remained in that oppressive gray room for what felt like endless hours, my gaze fixed on the photographs of a life that was now being lived by something else entirely. Then, the ceiling of the gray room began to ripple. A thin slit materialized in the plaster, and a small camera lens poked through, clicking softly as it captured a picture of me, Clara, sitting utterly still on the chair. A few minutes later, the side door slid open again. My brother Leo was standing there, but his eyes were like chips of black glass, devoid of light, and his skin possessed a faint, disturbing grayish pallor. He didn't utter a word. He simply handed me a tray laden with food and a fresh set of clothes. "The Observer is pleased with your performance today," the boy stated. His voice sounded distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Too low, too slow. "You are far more adept at embodying the shadow than the last one." He closed the door again, the soft thud echoing in the suffocating silence. That was 5 years ago. I am still here, in this gray room. I watch my family through the pinprick lenses in the ceiling. I watch the me upstairs grow older, graduate from university, and secure a position at a prominent bank. Sometimes, when the me upstairs gazes into the bathroom mirror, he pauses for a lingering second. He stares directly into his own reflected eyes, and for a brief, terrifying instant, I catch a flicker of gray deep within his pupils. He knows I'm here. He's confirming that I am still seated on this chair. Because if I were ever to leave this room, he would have no sanctuary. And this house despises an empty shadow. Eleanor's living room window almost always looked out onto her quaint garden path. Most mornings, she could open the blinds, gaze at her roses, and start her day without a hitch, most of the time. But on April 5, 2012, she awoke to the croaking symphony of unseen amphibians and the ominous splashing of heavy bodies. A pack of alligators, she thought, were certainly lurking in the misty swamp beyond her window. They didn't come in, and she didn't feel threatened, just profoundly disoriented. She smelled the rank, stagnant water and the decaying vegetation. She could feel the humid air seeping between the panes, carrying with it the buzzing of unseen insects. The creatures beyond seemed oblivious to her presence, and she blinked, rubbed her eyes groggily, and stared out into the familiar garden path, now dimly lit by the morning sun. She would have assumed she was dreaming or hallucinating were it not for the traces of damp mud and strange fibrous weeds that had been carried onto her rug by the unexpected draft. Anyway, it continued like that for a while. Sometime in 2018, she returned home after a particularly grueling shift and slumped onto her sofa. She glanced toward the window, expecting the gentle sway of her cherry tree. Instead, the blinding white glare of an Arctic ice cap beat down on her, the wind howling a frigid symphony. She sighed, pulled a blanket over herself, and went to sleep in the spare room. It had become commonplace at this point. She knew her normal view would come back eventually, so she just resigned herself to the temporary displacement. Sometimes it was worse than others. There was one night, late in 2020, that she nearly suffocated as her window suddenly revealed the churning, sulfurous maw of an active volcano. A torrent of choking ash and searing heat rushed in, pulling her from her sofa. She heard her plants crackle and furniture splinter as molten rock spat over her coffee table, and she was barely able to gasp for air before the heat overwhelmed her. Up was down, left was right. Everything was chaos. And then she was back on the floor of her living room, peeling volcanic ash and charred debris from her sopping hair like some disheveled cartoon character. She couldn't help but let out a nervous chuckle at the sheer absurdity. It went on like this for years. Every so often, her living room window just became some sort of portal to somewhere else. She was almost never in any sort of danger, and she never mapped out any sort of pattern to the timing or locations, so all she could do was hunker down and let it pass. It rarely lasted more than a few minutes. But just last night, all of that changed. She was fast asleep, when suddenly a soul-rending shriek pierced the air. She jumped to her feet in a cold sweat. She'd never heard anything like that before. Her eyes slowly, hesitantly panned over to the window. She expected to see a war zone or ancient ruins or something. Instead, what greeted her gaze was a swirling vortex of iridescent, sickly green clouds, beneath which pulsed a vast, shimmering ocean of broken glass. Periodically, a shard of glass began to ripple rapidly, then shatter inward, emitting yet another piercing, unearthly wail. In its place was a void of absolute darkness, before eventually, this canvas of unreality appeared to crystallize, a new fragment of glass into existence. With some trepidation, she stepped toward the window. She had no idea what this place was, but she felt it calling to her. Are you familiar with the call of the void? It's a phenomenon where people standing over cliffs, balconies, and the like suddenly feel an urge to jump, even if they're not remotely suicidal, sometimes followed by an intense sense of panic and remorse. This felt similar. She had no desire to enter this alien chasm, but she also felt herself inexorably drawn toward the entryway. She couldn't stop her legs from walking closer and closer. Her ears began to ring with a bizarre, sickening hum, indistinct whispers that, frighteningly, almost made sense. She felt the hairs on her arms stand up. It was cold, colder than she'd ever felt before. It almost seemed like whatever unseen force was drawing her into the abyss was pulling all warmth and light out of her apartment. She shivered and took another unwilling step. As she approached the window, a limb shot up from below her field of view. A skeletal appendage gripped the bottom of the window frame and scrabbled desperately for purchase. Its sinews flexed as it attempted to pull its unseen body up. Eleanor froze. She had no idea who or what this creature was. She didn't know if it was human, if it meant her harm, if it was a victim or a perpetrator, or... And before she had a chance to even process that, the window returned to normal. Her standard garden path was back. The only evidence of that hell was a handful of pulverized glass fragments lying on the sill, the familiar view now her anchor to reality. Every other time the window shifted, it went to somewhere easily identifiable. She didn't know what was causing it or where these areas physically were, but they logically made sense as a space on this earth. But that place was an impossible nightmare realm. She talked to physicists, mystics, historians, even the peculiar archivist at the old library. No one seemed to have the foggiest idea what was going on, or why the phenomenon was isolated to her living room window. Almost none of them believed her to begin with. All she knew was that she'd signed the papers to sell the apartment, and it was slated for demolition. At first it was a relief, but then it hit her. What happens if the phenomenon occurs again after the window is reduced to rubble?